coming
Why
up.
don't the whites start a anti-white movement to protect their culture, as you just mentioned about the Jews, the blacks are doing it. Why don't the whites join forces with the Jews and the blacks and they all just fight together about it?
I mean, if the whites were to band together and form some kind of pro-white group, that kind of sounds like white supremacy and white
But it would
nationalism.
be no
And
different
so
than
that
the
reminds me of
black.
people in the Klan.
It would be no
But
different than the blacks and the so-called Jews. They're doing the same thing. What's wrong with
no,
the
it's not the
whites doing
same
it?
thing. It's not the same thing because whites have most of the power in this country.
That's
And
amazing.
power.
You write that the blacks, because of all this microaggression stuff that's happening, quote unquote, you write that the blacks and the Jews need to, that this stuff is dividing the blacks and the Jews rather than them coming together and deal with racism. Can you explain
With
that?
the Yeah, for the attack on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion that's taking place right now, we're at this broad scale of, unwinding affirmative action, companies and universities pulling back from DEI programs, and which I find very problematic because that is how you level the playing field and try to equalize opportunity. But part of what I am seeing is there are some people, using uh, as part of a tool to undermine DEI, saying that it's somehow anti-Semitic, which is not true. And I find that unfortunate because then it just tries to pit two marginalized groups against each other who should be natural allies. It's the same thing with the affirmative action case that was decided last summer by the Supreme Court around affirmative action, which was, pitting some Asian Americans against Blacks and Latinos, which is really problematic. And to me, what the backdrop is just trying to like divide and conquer, as opposed to what should be the core focus, which is attacking white supremacy and racism in America and trying to equalize opportunity for everybody.
And why should the Jews join forces with the blacks about all this stuff? When the Jews and the whites get along, they all work, for the most part, they work hard. They do their own thing. They educate their families, their own businesses and things. So the whites and Jews do not really have a major problem. Why should they join with the blacks? And the Jews and the blacks don't like each other. They naturally don't like each other. And
No, I don't think
they
it's
have
true.
not liked
I don't
each
think
other
it.
in a long time. I mean, when I was growing up, blacks and Jews got along well because of religion. But Jews don't like the black. They're afraid of them. And they've always been afraid of them, at least for the last 70 years or so. Why should the Jews join forces with the blacks when they don't particularly like living around them, being around them, because they are so out of control? The blacks are.
Okay, there's a whole bunch of broad sweeping statements about Jewish people, white people, and Black people, but I will respond to some of what you said, which is that, you know, not all white people, when I say white people, I mean not all like Christian, non-Jewish white people are okay with Jews. Jewish people have experienced extreme anti-Semitism and marginalization. I mean, even if you look at the Unite the Right rally that happened in Virginia, I guess, was it 2017, where they were saying like Jews will not replace us and the replacement theory. I mean, that is not supportive of Jewish people and their plight. But at the same time, Jews, so that's like how there could be an affinity between blacks and people of, not black, people of color and Jews, is this common experience of marginalization and discrimination. But then at the same time, many Jews, not all Jews, but the majority of them are white. So they still experience white privilege and some of the benefits that come with being white. And so I think that could be the source of some tension. But the way that I see it is that they're just being, for people that are buying into the anti-Semitism argument against DEI, they're just being sucked into, a problematic argument as a distraction when the big purpose really should be to attack white supremacy and broad scale discrimination in America.
I know that in all culture you have what they call liberal Jews or liberal whites or liberal blacks. And then you have conservative Jews, conservative whites, and conservative blacks. And those two tend to split and fight one another. You can find that in all races, but I still don't understand why would the Jews. I know a lot of Jewish people and white people and black people. I don't understand why would the Jews want to join against people that they're afraid of living around, or
Not all
afraid of being
Jews.
robbed, or afraid of violence, because the blacks are very violent. Not all, but most. Not all, not all,
Okay,
but
you're
most
saying
very,
a whole bunch of problematic statements, Jesse, because not, black people do not have a natural propensity for crime
well,
and
then what's
violence and the
wrong with them
like.
then? Why they commit so much crime if they don't have a natural?
Let me first get to your first question,
Okay.
right? So in terms of, just as I was saying before, the majority of Jews in, at least in this country are white, right? So as a result of that, they're not immune to still engaging in racism, anti-black racism, and white supremacy, right? So some of
Those
them
are
can
liberal
still.
Jews who are saying that and they're being
No,
dishonest.
I'm just saying this is just a reality. Like they're not immune to it. But at the same time, Jewish people are still experiencing their own series of challenges because there are still hate crimes. Like synagogues are still being shot up. That's happened in the past, 5 years. They're still having, maybe a swastika painted on a synagogue. So it's not like they're not experiencing anti-Semitism in this country, which makes them understand what it's like to be marginalized. They're still targeted as a group, just not by everybody. So it's like they're a group that's targeted, while at the same time, the whites within that group can still be engaging in anti-black racism as well. But so the fact that they're marginalized, that is where the harmony should be, and where the focus is. And the greater focus really should be focusing on the majority white population, which is more of a Christian denomination, that is engaged in opportunity hoarding.
I've noticed that in this country, whites are more under attack than any other race when it comes to so-called racial stuff. Whites are being robbed, murdered, killed, raped. They're breaking into their homes. They're carjacking them. Their women are being raped. And everyone seems to be going against the whites. Why don't the whites start a anti-white movement to protect their culture, as you just mentioned about the Jews, the blacks are doing it? Why don't the whites join forces with the Jews and the blacks and they all just fight together about it?
I mean, if the whites were to band together and form some kind of pro-white group, that kind of sounds like white supremacy and white
But it would
nationalism.
be no
And
different
so
than
that
the
reminds me
black.
of people in the Klan.
It would be no
But
different than the blacks and the so-called Jews. They're doing the same thing. What's wrong with
no,
the
it's not the
whites doing
same
it?
thing. It's not the same thing because whites have most of the power in this country.
That's
And
amazing.
power is a critical ingredient in what's transpiring in people's lives in terms of access to opportunity, whether or not you can buy a house, whether or not you can go to a good school. Those are the key things that are playing out. So I don't believe and I don't buy into the whole white victimhood mentality, because whites are not, as a group, they are not being victimized.
So if the whites have so much power as the non-whites are claiming, especially the blacks are claiming, why don't the whites just kick the blacks and everybody out of their country if they don't like them? If they got all
Well,
this
why is it? No,
superior
no.
power,
Well,
why
wait.
don't they
Let's
just
get
kick
into
them out of
how do you
their?
say they,
Why
why do you
don't they
say
kick them out
their
of their
country?
country?
Wait, their country. You
Right.
mean our country?
What do you mean?
You said why not keep them out of their country? You
Right.
mean our country?
Are
You
you?
said it as if this country is like only for white people.
Well, and I'm sure you would agree to that. It was founded and created by white men, and with the help of God, they created the greatest country on this side of heaven. And then they created the Constitution, which is amazing, allowing all these other people to come in, and then the people come in and they turn on the whites. I know you agree with that, right?